Hello, this is a teacher's guide to the map book. We're looking at student groupings. What's the best way to organize these materials with different groups? Well, you might have a whole class, but they all have different levels. So, low beginning literacy, pre literacy. If that happens, you can, I think, make this curriculum stretch to low beginning. But if your class has, all the way to intermediate and advanced, it's going to be really difficult for you. You can still use this, but you wouldn't be able to utilize it in a whole class way. Okay. You might have just a small group, 2 to 5, somewhere in there, where you can do a pull out and just use it with that group. And you might just have like one or two individuals. And how do you best present the materials in that case? Well, if it's a whole class, you need to look at a few things. Do most of them speak Farsi or Dari? That would be ideal. You can use it with other languages. For example, in my classroom, we have Farsi, Dari, Russian, Thai. There's so many different languages, Spanish. And in that case, I still have them do it with us, but they are just ignoring the Farsi. Luckily, the most students I've met that have different backgrounds are actually able to take the word that's being presented to them and translate it on their own and then read that translation because they read and write in their language and they're trying to learn English. Um, Also, if they just need vocabulary, there's a lot of good, meaningful vocabulary in here. So we want to make sure that they're getting some vocabulary. If that's needed, you could make it work. So you can do whole class instruction as long as it's all kind of at a lower level, as long as the majority of the students speak Farsi or Dari, and as long as they need vocabulary. If I were doing whole class instructions, I would organize it by just small packets, maybe 2 or 3 letters each. So I would just, as I'm going along, just, the next day we pass out a few other papers. We do everything together. That's great when you can do something like that. However, I know that's really rare that you just have a class and they're all on one happy little level. That's just really not the thing that happens. So in that case, small group instruction. Okay. So, what's one way of organizing the materials? Well, you can create larger packets. That's one option. Or I've seen binders work really well. So, you just run off copies and you place a handout of that in like a plastic sleeve. You get whiteboard markers and erasers or just tissues, and that can save quite a lot of money and quite a lot of time because you're going to be running back and forth, trying to copy all these pages. And meanwhile, they could have just, erased it and then traced the letter A again without consuming multiple papers. Also, I've seen people break it up. So they'll have like 4 different binders, and one of them will have A through H. And then once the student is finished working with that one, they'll put that back. And that's when they get number 2, which is I through Q. So you can organize it in a way where it's individual students, but it still makes sense in a small group. You may, however, just have a few, just a few students. And in that case, it would be really ideal if you could hole punch the handouts and just put them in a binder. So you could just hand that to them and be like, okay, this is what you do. You're working through this one, and I'm assisting. Or it's possible that you can put in a purchase order and say, you know what, I already have all these pages that I printed out. Can we just bind them? That would be, great. And I know that some places we'll give you the funds to be able to make a purchase order. If not, again, we're kind of back to packets. So again, there's, a full range of what might be happening in your classroom, whether it's individual students that are at this level, maybe you have a group of them, or maybe you're lucky enough to just have a whole class. Either way, there's different options as far as how to handle the materials. Do you want to slowly go over 2 letters at a time? Do you need them to be able to go in a small group and proceed at their own pace? And if it's an individual, can you treat this as a book where you would just hand them the book and let them work through it, and they could use that in the evenings as well to study. So it just depends on who you have as far as students in front of you, and then just deciding what's the best way of doing that. But I've definitely seen these 3 different ways, work really well depending on your classroom and what you're willing to do as far as grouping and creating materials.